A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. I never thought my family's will would unravel like a cheap piece of yarn, but here we are, sitting at our cramped kitchen table under the flickering light bulb that's a bit too yellow, discussing the accusations that have turned my whole world upside down. My brothers and I grew up idolizing our two uncles, who were the quintessential cool relatives, full of jokes, stories about their time in the military, and life lessons that felt like gold on summer afternoons. Our family gatherings often felt like a circus, laughter, potluck dishes that were barely edible, and the feeling that we were connected by something unbreakable, woven tight through years of shared experiences. But as my parents aged, the family dynamics began to shift in unsettling ways. The whispers started when my parents, both long retired and now comfortably settled in a quiet life, began discussing their estate plan. It had never been something I paid much attention to until my dad casually mentioned to me one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner that he and my mom had decided not to leave any significant inheritance to our uncles, which was a shock to hear. "We worked hard for what we have," he said, and I could tell he was a little offended that his brothers would presume otherwise. It made sense, right? After all, our family's financial struggles back in the day were no secret, and to think they might expect something now felt like a betrayal. But who was I to carry this burden? Then came the day it all changed. The kitchen remained silent, the kind of silent that presses heavily against your chest, until my older brother, Jason, unexpectedly burst in with the kind of energy reserved for someone who has just discovered the cure for a long-standing disease. He proclaimed he had heard from one of his friends about my Uncle Mark planning a family reunion and was hellbent on incorporating discussions about inheritance into the festivities. It felt crass to me, the idea of talking about money amongst all the laughter and nostalgic reminiscing, but it was as if I were in a play where I could either choose to speak my lines or just freeze on stage, utterly paralyzed by the impending drama. In my heart, I knew I should tell them, but the thought of being the one to drop that bomb was unbearable. Days passed, each one heavier than the last, while I kept my secret, debating whether to alert my uncles or to let them assume that something profound would come their way. The thought of my father's words rang in my mind, "Don't let them think they can take what's ours," and part of me held onto that sentiment with a grip stronger than iron. I started to feel guilty, especially when I noticed how quiet the uncles were whenever they visited. The usual banter gave way to awkward pauses as they sidled up to the kitchen counter, waiting for a slice of my mom's famous apple pie and, perhaps, a hint of what was to come. One afternoon, I couldn't take it any longer. I texted my uncles to meet with me for coffee, hoping against hope that I could muster the courage to be straightforward, to be the one to break the news gently, perhaps even offering them some semblance of understanding. They showed up on a Tuesday morning, both eager and slightly skeptical. The cafe was quaint, light flooded through the large windows, and as soon as we sat down, I found myself staring at the cup of steaming coffee in front of me, their expectant eyes glancing between me and the pastry display. My mouth felt dry when I finally spoke, the words catching like thorns in my throat, unsure how to wrap them in kindness. I told them about my parents' decision, watched their faces shift from curiosity to disbelief, and then dismay. Mark, in particular, looked wounded, like I'd trampled on something sacred. "We've always been family," he said, his voice a mix of hurt and disappointment. How could they do this to us? I felt every inch of that guilt stab deep. The conversation spiraled, and by the time we parted, my heart was heavy with regret and concern. Days turned into weeks as the awkwardness settled like dust in the corners of our once bustling family gatherings. Neither my uncles nor I could bridge the emotional chasm that had suddenly appeared. Each time they visited, they'd hug me but linger a second longer as if waiting for an apology or some clarification that I just couldn't offer. My brothers and I spoke often about the rift, our conversations tinged with uncertainty about whether we'd created an irreparable divide between our family factions. Soon, my parents caught wind of the tension, and I knew they felt the strain, their content lives now shadowed by the repercussions of their decision. Finally, after a particularly strained holiday dinner, I sat down with my parents and laid everything out, the tension, the questions from my uncles, and how much it pained me to face them each time without a resolution. To my surprise, they listened quietly, expressions unreadable. After a long pause, my father finally sighed, "Maybe we should talk to them, clear the air." And it struck me then how refreshing honesty could be, how liberating it felt just to strip away the weight I'd shouldered alone. A few weeks later, my parents called my uncles over for dinner, and we all sat together, the kitchen table once again laden not just with food but with a sense of collective apprehension and hope. When the discussion turned to the will and my uncles had been given the full context of my parents' perspective, things changed. I watched as they spoke, voices rising and falling with emotion, laughter and sorrow spilling forth in equal measure. It became clear that bonds could stretch and twist but wouldn't easily break if we chose to approach each other with empathy rather than fists clenched in anger. With each shared story about their upbringing, about what our family's legacy meant to them, I felt the air lighten, the invisible walls we'd built around ourselves, slowly crumbling with every word spoken. In the end, I learned that while silence may sometimes feel easier, especially when wielded as a shield against discomfort, it can also isolate you just as much as any conflict. I realized that navigating family relationships, especially in the wake of hidden truths, demanded courage, a courage that often welcomes growth rather than resentment. As we settled into genuine conversation, I felt hope sprout anew. My family wouldn't just survive this, we'd find a way to thrive, learning to hold conversations that resonated with love and honesty. Even the hiccups along the way served a purpose, reminding us how valuable our connections truly were, especially when seasons of rediscovery were closer than we dared to believe. Update: a few months later, things have transformed completely. Our family reunions now feel almost like rebirths, where laughter mingles with open conversations, and we hold space for one another. My uncles even started a family project with my dad, turning an old shed into a community tool library for our neighborhood. It's beautiful, surrounded by greenery, echoes of chatter, and the sense of purpose we've created together. Who knew the truth could intertwine rather than tear us apart? Life isn't perfect, but every single gathering now feels so full of light, and I'm filled with gratitude for the journey. It's hard to sum up the feelings that swirl within me when I think about how things have changed. I remember the first family gathering after the truth spilled out into the open like the last drops of a long overdue rain. There we were, gathered in Grandma's backyard, a place that had been both sanctuary and battleground in my memories. The air felt electrified with a mix of apprehension and hope. It was the first time since our family dinner when everyone knew the narrative had shifted. I could see my uncles, eyes darting between the familiar, old family photo frames, shadowed memories, and the unfamiliar, a canvas of new experiences we were now creating together. When my dad proposed the idea of turning the old shed into a community tool library, it was met with a bit of silence, the kind that feels like the pause before a storm. I held my breath, half expecting one of my uncles to toss in an argument about money or inheritance, to feel the tension crackle again. But instead, I watched as it began to sink in for everyone. One uncle, the quietest among us, finally spoke up, his voice soft and a little shaky. "We could use this space for something good," he said, a light flickering in his eyes. I felt the tension fade in that moment. It was as if the universe shifted just a little, nudging us toward something better. As the days turned into weeks, our gatherings evolved into something closer to revivals, moments infused with laughter that felt both healing and authentic. We would sit around the fire pit, sharing stories that once would have gone uncrossed, tales of our childhood, lessons learned, heartbreaks endured. I noticed my uncles opening up about their own lives, vulnerabilities exposed like the petals of a blossoming flower. There was a remarkable softness when they spoke to me, their voices imbued with sincerity and a desire to connect that had seemed so distant before. There was a bond forming, tangible as the wood we were turning into shelves for the library. It was a beautiful thing to witness. It felt like watching a tapestry being woven, thread by thread, stitch by stitch, all colored by truth and understanding. When we finally gathered for the grand opening of the tool library, I stood back and took it all in. The shed had transformed, painted a deep green that blended perfectly with the surrounding trees, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh wood and laughter. Neighbors trickled in, and my heart swelled as I watched my uncles explain how to borrow tools to curious families. My dad stood next to them, beaming with pride. For once, they were not just my uncles, they had become community leaders, actively fostering connection and collaboration. Watching the joy flicker across their faces felt like a natural high, one that enveloped us all. There, in the warmth of that late afternoon sun, I realized that while we had stumbled through our own storms, we were now creating a lighthouse, something that illuminated our path forward. Reflecting on this journey, I felt a gentle sense of closure, the kind that doesn't erase the past but rather integrates it into something stronger, wiser. While the landscape of our family dynamic had changed forever, it felt as if we had welcomed a new chapter instead of mourning the old one. The future seemed less daunting, more inviting, like stepping into a vast, sunlit field rather than wading through murky water. I often think about how our initial fear of inheritance and material legacies morphed into an appreciation of shared experiences and memories created together. We realized that the true inheritance wasn't hidden behind walls of a grand home, but rather in the laughter and trust forged among us. As I look ahead, I no longer see them just as my uncles who might have held me at arm's length. They're my partners in this journey of growth, reminding me with every shared meal and exchanged story that family isn't merely defined by blood or bonds but by the willingness to come together in authenticity. And that truth, I've learned, is something worth cherishing far beyond any inheritance. Life is a creating and recreating cycle, and somehow, through it all, my heart remains full of gratitude, not just for how things have transformed, but for the love that has managed to intertwine our lives once more. As I sit here reflecting on the changes in our family, I can't help but smile at the way the world feels lighter now. It's almost surreal, the way an unspoken tension has been lifted, replaced by a warmth that envelops our gatherings like a cozy blanket. The first reunion after my revelation was a tentative affair, with nervous glances exchanged and silences hanging heavy in the air. Yet, as the sun sank low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, something shifted. My father started sharing stories of our grandfather, tales that spilled his laughter and life wisdom, and slowly, one by one, my uncles loosened up, joining in with their own memories, their voices blending like a harmonious song. These weren't just reflections of the past, they were seeds for our new beginning. Each laugh echoed with a hint of relief, and with every shared story, the walls we'd built around our hearts began to crumble. It was in those moments that we discovered we were still connected, despite the pain that had lingered for too long. As the months passed, we set to work on the community tool library, a project that not only renovated a physical space but also our emotional landscapes. I forged new bonds with my uncles, who revealed surprising depths to their personalities. One uncle had a knack for woodworking, while another had a passion for gardening. Together, they taught me how to repair rusted tools, turning mundane objects into treasures, much like the transformation we were undergoing as a family. On weekends, we'd gather at the old shed, which became a canvas for our creativity. Laughter filled the air as we sanded down surfaces, painted walls, and planted flowers around the entrance, breathing life into the once neglected structure. In those sunlit hours, I found healing amidst the sawdust and smiles. But the biggest surprise came when my uncles confessed their regrets about the distance that had grown between us all those years. They shared their fears of being perceived as distant or unsupportive, their intentions muddled by misunderstandings and silence. It was a sobering moment, simply listening to them. The air felt charged with vulnerability, like a precious gift exchanged between us. I shared my own struggles, my feelings of intimidation that had kept me at a distance, and slowly we realized how intertwined our experiences were. Each of us had been holding back, afraid that showing our true selves would push us further apart. It was difficult, peeling back those layers, but there was a profound sense of liberation in our honesty. The culmination of this journey came during our fall gathering, a time when the air would grow crisper and the leaves would transform into brilliant shades of red and gold. We decided to have a potluck, each family member contributing a dish that represented their favorite family recipe. As we gathered around the long table laden with food, I felt a rush of warmth wash over me, the beauty of simple moments shared with cherished people. We passed plates laden with food, each offering accompanied by stories that brought those dishes to life. My aunt's rich lasagna made with love, my uncle's spicy chili shared on cold winter nights, and my father's homemade apple pie that reminded us all of our summer harvests. With every bite, I realized nourishment wasn't just physical, it was emotional, forged in the trials we had weathered together. The laughter returned, but this time it was accompanied by a shared understanding of our vulnerabilities. The battles fought in silence had made the joy that much sweeter. And as the sun set, casting a warm glow through the trees, it felt like a real celebration, not just of the food but of us, our journey towards authenticity. As the echoes of laughter danced around us, I could feel the weight of the past slipping away, replaced by a newfound appreciation of family that went beyond mere obligation. My heart soared with gratitude for the wisdom of honesty, for the connections we managed to rebuild through embracing our truths. In this moment, I understood that not every story unfolds perfectly. The beauty lies in the chance to start anew, to cherish what we've built together, and to continue shaping a family that thrives on openness and love, a legacy worth far more than any inheritance could ever offer. I always believed that morality was a sliding scale, a gradient of gray rather than a rigid line between right and wrong, but it wasn't until the day that changed everything for me that I truly understood just how complex human choices could be. My name is Ava, a 35-year-old graphic designer living in a small town where everyone knows everyone else's business. Recently, I found myself at a crossroads when it came to my best friend, Megan, and her escalating issues with her husband, Jason, who I had known for nearly as long as I had known her. It all started when I noticed subtle changes in Megan's demeanor. She had become quieter, more withdrawn, often distracted during our weekly brunches. After weeks of gentle nudging and concern, she finally opened up, revealing that Jason had begun to act possessive and controlling, belittling her in front of her friends and limiting her contact with us. The moment she confessed her struggles, a knot twisted tightly in my stomach. I could feel her pain, and the urge to confront Jason, to protect my friend, bubbled just under the surface. However, as Megan continued to share her story, I realized how deeply complicated the situation was. She still loved Jason, and despite his flaws, they had a life together that she didn't want to destroy. Still, as the weeks passed and her distress deepened, I became increasingly torn. Was it right to stand by silently while she suffered? I longed to speak out, to hold Jason accountable, but with each passing day, the thought of confronting him seemed more daunting than liberating. Picking up my phone, I considered reaching out to Jason for coffee under the pretense of catching up. But the idea of sitting across from him, feigning ignorance about the turmoil he was causing, made me feel dirty. It felt like betrayal, not just to him, but to Megan. Yet, I grappled with the fact that doing nothing felt like I was enabling his behavior. One night, I finally decided to vent my frustrations on an online forum dedicated to relationships and moral dilemmas, posting under the title AITA for refusing to do the morally correct thing. Writing it out helped, but circulating the thoughts in my mind only made the burden heavier. I didn't know what was right or wrong anymore, only that I was scared for Megan, scared for what might happen if I brought everything out into the open. Unlike most stories, mine did not fit into neat categories of good versus bad, hero versus villain. It was just a messy reality waiting to implode. Before I knew it, another few weeks slid by. Frustration began to bubble beneath my surface, tempered only by glimmers of hope as I observed Megan gradually reclaiming her voice, taking up yoga classes, meeting friends, and laughing again. However, amidst these moments of brightness, Jason still lurked in the background, his shadows looming heavier. One evening, while we were wrapping up dinner, Megan received a text that left her pale and shaking. It was Jason, apoplectic with jealousy over something trivial, her liking a post from an old friend on social media. I could see her teetering on the edge, like a bird testing the wind before flight. Thoughts warred inside me. Should I step in, remind her of the strength she had shown in the past few weeks, or should I keep my mouth shut and simply be the supportive friend while allowing her to navigate her feelings? I felt like I was watching a train wreck in slow motion. Eventually, I did what I had dreaded most. I reached out to Jason. My heart pounded as I crafted a message, not to accuse him, but to express genuine concern for both him and Megan. My intention was to balance compassion with clarity, but I was met with rage and denial. I wondered if I had opened a Pandora's box that could not be closed. When he accused me of trying to drive a wedge between them, I realized the irony of my position. In my attempt to do the right thing, I had unwittingly made myself the antagonist. In the following weeks, Megan confronted me after discovering my message to him. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth, were clouded with disappointment. I struggled to articulate my intentions, the care and worry I felt, but her heart was set on defending Jason, framing my actions as indiscriminate meddling. I had breached her trust, and suddenly, I felt like I was losing her all over again. Soon after, she distanced herself from me, creating a chasm between us that I feared was too wide to bridge. Yet, time has a funny way of softening the most jagged edges of our hearts. A few months later, I received a text from Megan, a single sentence that shattered the silence. I think I need to talk. When we met, the weight of our shared silence was palpable. Megan spoke of her feelings suffocating her, sprouting roots in the cracks of their relationship. She had grown disenchanted with Jason's behavior but felt trapped by her own heart, still fiercely in love but desiring independence. I listened intently as she unpacked her turmoil, aware that she was wrestling with the very emotions I once feared might consume her. This time, rather than leading with what I had wanted her to do, I became merely a vessel for her thoughts. In that moment, a wave of relief washed over me, perhaps refusal to act decisively that day was not weakness but a necessary pause allowing her to process her own feelings. By simply listening, I had helped her find the strength she inadvertently carried all along. In the months that followed, Megan started seeing a therapist and began to slowly reclaim her autonomy. They eventually parted ways, but to my joy, that didn't sever our friendship. Instead, it brought us closer as she learned to trust again, both in herself and in me. Now, whenever I revisit that challenging time, I reflect on how morality sometimes presents itself as a confusing puzzle, one where context molds our decisions, and perhaps my hesitation was the quiet space she needed to arrive at her own truth. As for Jason, he remains a specter in our past. While I refuse to vilify him, I recognize that some lessons require a deeper understanding of ourselves before we can act. I find comfort in knowing that we each navigate our paths at our own pace, learning that sometimes, the morally correct choice is simply to let someone discover their own strength. As I sit here, wrapped in the warmth of late afternoon sunlight streaming through my window, the peaceful hush of the neighborhood outside reminds me how far we've come since that turbulent chapter of our lives. My thoughts drift to the last moments we shared as a group before everything spiraled, an innocent dinner gathering where laughter danced around the table like light refracted through crystal, our conversations punctuated by the clinking of wine glasses and the steady simmer of rich tomato sauce in the kitchen. It was on that evening that I first sensed the underlying tension, the unspoken rift between Elizabeth and Jason that hung in the air like a fragile thread, barely visible but undeniably there. I remember glancing at Elizabeth, her smile a facade that cracked ever so slightly when Jason cracked his usual self-deprecating joke, an enthusiastic quip that drew a round of laughter but which I saw, in her eyes, was tinged with something deeper, disappointment, maybe, or a yearning for a connection that felt just out of reach. I had always been a firm believer in the importance of open communication, and I felt an instinctual urge to navigate the storm building between them, yet here I was, paralyzed by the weight of their love and conflict. Would I really be the one to pry it open, to force them into confrontation when perhaps Elizabeth needed to discover her limits in her own time? My heart whispered that sometimes intervention doesn't aid evolution, instead, it risks suffocating the growth that must occur organically. After Jason's sudden departure from our lives, the quiet stretched into a painful silence. Elizabeth threw herself into her art, creating with a fervor I hadn't seen before, colors splattering against canvas like the release she craved but couldn't express in words. Each brushstroke seemed to channel her pain, a cathartic reminder of resilience. I found solace in the idea that in allowing her to navigate her relationship with him, unlike the casual judgments thrown down from others in our circle, I had played an understated role in her journey of self-discovery. It was an odd comfort, knowing I had stood back, letting the fragile threads of her choices bind her together, even if the process left a knot in my own stomach. Some nights, we would sit on my cramped balcony, my old wind chimes tinkling softly in the breeze as the stars blinked like whispers overhead, and I would ask her, "Are you feeling okay?" Each word laced with genuine curiosity, waiting for her revealing truths. "Not yet," she'd reply softly, her gaze drawn to the cosmos, "but I'm figuring it out." There was something about those words, the way they hung in the air, heavy with unexpressed emotions, that settled an uneasy peace within me. I began to understand that the morally correct thing might not fray the edges of our friendships or force open wounds that needed time to heal. Instead, perhaps it simply meant stepping aside, guiding someone gently towards the door, and trusting they'd find their own way back to the light. Months passed, and I reveled in the small milestones, her laughter ringing out clearer, her sunsets painted with hope rather than sorrow. Each moment unfurled like petals in spring, moving us away from Jason's shadow and closer to a rediscovered autonomy. I would hear stories from mutual friends about where his life had wandered, the detours and dead ends that always intermingled with success. He became some mythic figure in the background of our lives. But it was strange how I could feel sympathy for him, too, an understanding that his decisions led him down a different, perhaps narrower path, even if they had hurt Elizabeth deeply. One evening, as we sat together on my balcony again, the sounds of distant laughter and music wafting through the complex, I found myself revealing my own struggles, my moments of indecision, the fears I had held tight like a lucky charm. Elizabeth listened, eyes bright and absorbing every word, and I could see the transformation within her had given her strength to bear my vulnerabilities without judgment. It felt freeing, this exchange of burdens. After all those months of navigating her own tumult, she offered in return a tender reassurance, "You're not wrong for wanting to be the good guy, you know. Just remember, sometimes being the good guy means knowing how to step back, too." In that quiet moment, surrounded by a galaxy spilling its secrets, I could finally let myself smile. I understood then that we are taught about right and wrong, but the grayness in between is where true morality thrives, in friendship, in support, and in allowing our loved ones to find their own light. As I write this reflection of our past, I can't help but think about the cascading ripples we leave in our wake, and how, even amid the tumult, Learning to foster resilience can guide us through the murk toward clarity. I'm grateful for Elizabeth and the strength we both found in our friendship, a space that flourished as we chose patience over pressure and acceptance over judgment. Perhaps the heart of this journey is just that, trusting the quiet strength we each possess, the intricacies of human connection woven into our very souls, reminding us how important it is to navigate our own truths. As I contemplate our journey, I feel the warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the window, casting gentle patterns across the wooden floor. It's a peaceful scene, yet it's tinged with the weight of what we've both endured. Elizabeth and I have always been the kinds of friends who could spend hours tethered to each other's thoughts, sharing our stories over cups of herbal tea in that little cafe downtown, a sanctuary filled with the soft hum of conversations and the aroma of freshly baked pastries. It was there, between discussions of our dreams and fears, that we confronted the shadow of Jason, an enigmatic figure who once filled our lives with chaos. I remember that day vividly, the one when Elizabeth finally shared the truths she had carefully hidden, her voice barely above a whisper as she recounted moments of vulnerability, moments where Jason had chipped away at her self-worth with a snake's charm, always promising love yet delivering heartbreak. Listening to her pains felt like holding the last petal of a wilting flower, fragile and poignant. I wanted to rush in and fix everything, to demand she cut ties with him and reclaim her voice, but instead, I sensed a deeper truth spiraling within her, a truth she needed to discover for herself. I reassured her, my tone steady and calm, reminding her that real strength comes not from action alone, but from understanding one's own choices and standing firm in their wake. As the days turned into weeks, our dialogues evolved. Elizabeth began to unravel inside herself, peeling back layers that I didn't even realize weighed so heavily on her heart. I offered my support, a steady presence as she moved beyond what had been buried in shame and doubt, navigating the landscape of her identity. She poured her anger and confusion into her art, transforming pain into bursts of color that vibrated with the life she was reclaiming. I watched in awe as she began to bloom like the wildflowers in spring, each brushstroke a testament to her resilience. During these pivotal moments, I often found myself wrestling with my decisions. Was I doing the morally correct thing by allowing her to wander through this messy journey without directing her? I questioned whether by standing back, I was somehow failing her, but deep down, I recognized that my role was not to be her knight rescuing her from the dragon, but rather the quiet guide who opened the door to her own fortress. This reflection echoed back to the reality that sometimes love means granting the agency to those we care for, allowing them the space to face truths that would ultimately lead to their liberation. In observing Elizabeth transform, I realized her process mirrored my own in profound ways. There were moments in my past, especially in my own relationships, where I sought to remain complicit rather than confrontation, choosing the path of least resistance over the arduous climb toward honesty. Eventually, she came to a decision late one evening. I could see it in the light flickering behind her eyes as we met at our usual spot. She was filled with a kind of quiet determination, reflecting the hues of a sunset surrendering to twilight. I told him it was over, she said, her voice steady as if she were confirming an appointment rather than ending a significant chapter of her life. In that moment, I felt a swell of pride for her, a deep recognition of the strength that had always resided within her. There was fear and sadness, yes, but there was also freedom, a shedding of burdens that she never deserved to carry. We sat there for a while, letting the silence envelop us like an embrace, both savoring her brave leap into the unknown. As I look back now, it's almost surreal how life unraveled. Months pass in a wash of colors, yet the vibrant patterns of our friendship remained anchored amidst the chaos. Elizabeth blossomed in ways I had never anticipated. She began giving talks at local art galleries, exploring themes of resilience and self-discovery, while I took to writing, chronicling our journey and its lessons. The landscape of our lives was no longer cluttered with remnants of the past but infused with hope and new beginnings. We learned that the morally correct path isn't always straightforward. It can lead you through uncharted territories, revealing nuances of strength hidden in vulnerability. Reflecting on our experience, I understand now that surrendering to the complexities of human emotion is a necessity. Rather than simply navigating the seas of righteousness, we embrace the ebb and flow of life and relationships, allowing ourselves to anchor in our truths. As I pour my thoughts onto paper, I find solace in this realization. There's a quiet beauty in patience, a strength in allowing others to find their own way, and perhaps the moral compass we seek often points inward, guiding us through the tides of our own existence. And though the future will always remain uncertain, I find strength in knowing that both Elizabeth and I have learned not just to face the storms but to dance in the rain, celebrating every moment of clarity that follows. As I close this chapter, I feel a gentle warmth within, a reminder that life is but a series of interconnected stories waiting to be shared and understood. In this shared understanding, I find comfort, and perhaps, in our own little way, we are each entitled to navigate the moral dilemmas of our lives, trusting in our ability to find meaning and growth. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon when my daughter, Clara, burst through the front door, her cheeks flushed from fresh air and excitement, the kind of joy only a 10-year-old could muster after a long day in school. "Dad," she exclaimed, her energy swirling around the room like a flurry of bees, "can Anna come over for dinner tonight?" On any other day, I would have jumped at the opportunity to have a friend of hers over, but that particular evening, I had a meeting scheduled that would run late, and Clara's best friend lived a good 20-minute walk away. Balancing work and family life was a constant juggling act, but this seemingly simple question ignited a flicker of guilt deep inside me, forcing me into a mental tug-of-war. "Sweetheart," I said softly, knowing I had to explain without dampening her spirits, "I have to leave for my meeting, and I can't walk Anna home after dinner like you want. I'll be back late." Clara's face fell for a moment, her bright smile wavering, but she nodded with an understanding that belied her age. "Okay, Dad," she whispered, but the disappointment hung thick in the air like a low-hanging cloud. As I prepared dinner, a simple pasta dish that Clara loved, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting both her and Anna down. After dinner, Clara felt it was essential to call Anna's parents to confirm she could stay for a little longer, and when the conversation shifted to how I wouldn't be able to escort Anna home, I heard muffled laughter on the other end of the line. "It's only a short walk," Anna's mom assured Clara. "She can handle it." I tried to shake off the sinking feeling in my stomach, but the weight of their reassurances felt like daggers piercing my resolve. I had never been one to shy away from responsibilities, and as the minutes trickled away before my meeting, the guilt morphed into an unsettling storm brewing inside me. What if something happened to Anna on that walk? What if I was the one responsible for that? My anxiety was heightened by the swirling chaos of parental judgment that we often hammered into each other on the schoolyard, the unspoken competition of who was doing a better job. I wondered, had I crossed a line? I genuinely believed my reasons were valid, but the idea of Clara's guilt was unbearable. I began to question whether I was, in fact, the one in the wrong. I eventually left for my meeting, doing my best to focus on the work at hand, yet the thought of Clara and her friend lingered as a whisper in my mind, reminding me of the company I was seeking to avoid. When I finally returned home, Clara was sitting on the couch, still waiting for me, while Anna had gone home, and I could not tell if Clara was sad or just simply tired. "Sorry, sweetheart," I murmured, kneeling beside her, "I know it wasn't exactly what you wanted tonight." To my surprise, she looked up at me with a smile that melted the tension away. "It's okay, Dad," she said simply, brushing it off with a wave of her tiny hand. Anna said she liked the walk. That revelation pulled me back, the bubble of relief rising in my chest. On the surface, it was evident Clara had accepted the situation, yet something deep inside me was still yearning for validation. Was I really the asshole here, or just a dad trying to balance practicalities with his daughter's happiness? I lingered on that question as I tucked Clara in that night, the moon casting a gentle glow through her window, and somehow, I realized that parenting meant navigating the gray areas where decisions could neither be categorized as purely right or wrong. A few weeks later, I stumbled upon a thread on Reddit titled "A Myth Asshole," and I curiously typed in my experience. The responses flooded in, varying from fellow parents who validated my struggle to some who accused me of negligence. As I read through the comments, a peculiar sense of community washed over me. It turned out, every parent has been faced with conflicting priorities, and perhaps, the discomfort that lingered in my chest that night was merely a reminder that parenting isn't about perfection, but rather the love and intention behind our actions. The post received a surprising amount of traction, and as I scrolled through a mix of perspectives, a gentle realization settled in my mind: there's no manual for being a parent, we all simply navigate through the darkness, hoping to find a flicker of understanding along the way. As these thoughts echoed in my mind, I savored the comforting warmth of my supportive Reddit community, reflecting on the multifaceted journey of parenthood, and there, amid virtual strangers, I found solace. It was neither the validation I had craved nor the judgment I had feared, but a realization that what mattered most wasn't if I was right, but that I cared deeply enough to question it in the first place. With that gentle realization still warming my heart, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, surrounded by the familiar chaos of my daughter's room, a tapestry of colorful drawings and dolls that had long ago discarded their pristine packaging. It was within this sanctuary of innocence and creativity that I began to understand the struggle each parent faces in their own way. I felt a pang of guilt about Rebecca, my daughter's friend, and how I had brushed off her request for a walk home. The faint echoes of their earlier laughter still lingered in the air, and I could almost hear the way the two of them had shouted secrets back and forth while playing in the backyard. It struck me then, that in my own swirling thoughts about chores and dinner, I had overlooked the little things that made my daughter feel secure and connected, and Rebecca too. I remembered how they would share dreams of future adventures while sitting on the swings, eyes bright with imagination. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with soft purples and oranges, I tried to piece together what had truly happened earlier. That day, the moment when I dismissed Rebecca's request so easily. It was a moment softened by the warmth of familiarity, that unwritten bond between parents that often feels too delicate to traverse. Perhaps I had thought it would be too much trouble, or maybe I didn't see Rebecca in the light of concern that my daughter did, an almost extension of our family, a girl who laughed a little louder with us, yet remained apart at times. The outdoors were chilly now, the air carrying a crisp scent of fall that crackled like dry leaves underfoot, and I knew I needed to make things right. Before I had time to ruminate any further, I stood up and slipped on my shoes, the soles connecting with the cool wooden floor offering a jolt of determination. I headed downstairs, fueled by purpose rather than guilt, and opened the front door into that refreshing evening chill. I could still see the faint glow of the streetlights ahead, a warm beacon against the encroaching night. Clutching my phone tightly, I called Rebecca's mother. The line beeped, echoing my uncertainty as I waited for her voice, but when she picked up, she was kind, instead of judgmental. We briefly chatted, exchanging snippets of our days, and when I mentioned how I had been contemplating the walk home I neglected, I could hear the smile in her voice when she responded. It was all so simple, yet I felt the weight of each moment we shared gonna dissolve any lingering worries. She assured me Rebecca had made it home just fine, but before we hung up, I asked if it might be all right if I walked with her to school the next day, just to ensure I was a better neighbor and a better parent. There was a brief moment of silence before Rebecca's mother chuckled. Absolutely, I think she'd love that. As I disconnected the call, the tight knot of anxiety in my chest began to untwist. It was hard to describe, that feeling of connection forming anew in this little community encapsulated by the comfort of nightly routines and the soft glow of streetlights. I found myself wandering through the evening, letting my mind linger on small hopes that seemed very large, as I mulled over the power of small gestures and the simple, intricate dance of friendships. Children, I realized, see everything in black and white, navigating their worlds in vivid colors of love and care, and perhaps it was that innocence I had taken for granted. By the time I returned home, the stars were scattered like tiny lanterns across the sky, and every worry I had momentarily faded into the backdrop of an evening gone to slumber. As I nestled into bed that night, something shifted within me, as if I had shed a layer of my past self. Even in my mistakes, the willingness to act, to reach out, to bridge distances however small, became a quiet fortification around my heart. After all, being a parent isn't about perfection but is rooted in connection in those very moments when we recognize our missteps and find ways to grow. And so, with a grateful heart and a serene mind, I drifted off into a deep sleep, knowing tomorrow would hold new possibilities, both for me and for Rebecca, entwined in this dance of discovery we call growing up. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtain, casting soft patterns across my bedroom walls and nudging me awake. The remnants of last night's insights lingered in my mind like a gentle whisper, reminding me of the intricacies of parenting and the lessons tucked within every moment. I rose from my bed feeling lighter, ready to nurture not just my daughter, but also the evolving bond I shared with her friend, Leah. As I maneuvered through our cozy kitchen, its walls adorned with family photographs chronicling our collective laughter and tears, I heard the familiar patter of small feet along the hallway. Rebecca appeared, her hair a tousled halo and her eyes still heavy with sleep, but brimming with the exuberance of a new day. "Can Leah come over today?" she asked, a spark of enthusiasm illuminating her face. My heart warmed at the sight of her unfiltered joy, and I nodded, already imagining the giggles and games that would fill our living room. But a pang of worry threaded through my thoughts. Would Leah feel welcome? Would she, too, share that flicker of childhood glee? With a determined spirit, I set about preparing for their day together. A fresh pot of cocoa brewing, I arranged some snacks, goldfish crackers shaped like tiny fish and vibrant fruits that glistened in the morning light. I left the door open, listening to the sweet sounds of Rebecca making elaborate plans for their imaginary adventures. Over the next few hours, laughter erupted from the living room, a melody that transformed the mundane into a symphony of friendship. I occasionally peeked in, witnessing a tapestry of imaginative play unfold before my eyes, two young friends engaged in a world they created, a nexus of creativity that blossomed in joyous bursts. But as the clock ticked towards lunchtime, I noticed a fleeting shadow cross Leah's face, a furrow of uncertainty that contradicted her laughter. It tugged at my heart, the instinctive urge to protect my daughter from any hurtful situations. I approached them gently, inviting Leah to help me with preparing lunch, hoping to create space for our budding connection. She hesitated but eventually followed me into the kitchen, her fingers gently twirling a lock of hair, an involuntary gesture that revealed her unease. "You're really good at making art, Leah," I said, trying to bridge the gap with warmth. "I saw some of your drawings the other day, how do you come up with those ideas?" Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise igniting amid the softness of her vulnerability. For a moment, she hesitated before venturing, "I just think about what makes me happy." Encouraged by her response, I nudged the conversation further, weaving in my own experiences with art, how it had helped me find joy during tough times. As we chatted, I noticed her shoulders relax, the tension ebbing away with each exchange. By the time we returned to Rebecca, there was a subtle shift in the air. Leah's laughter rang clearer, buoyed by the sense of acceptance that filled our home. After lunch, the three of us sprawled on the floor with markers, paper, and sticky notes. I watched as Leah shared her ideas with Rebecca, who infused them with her own silly antics. They embarked on a frenzy of creativity, and soon the dining room transformed into an explosion of colors, the lyrics from their favorite songs floating through the air as they danced amid their imaginings. It was in those moments, those delicate and unscripted memories, layered with laughter and imaginative play, that I felt the morning's wisdom coalesce within me. I felt grateful for the opportunity to step beyond my own discomfort. After Leah's mother arrived later in the day to retrieve her, I found myself yearning for a way to continue fostering their connection, knowing it wasn't just about me learning to navigate the complexities of relationships, it was about Rebecca growing into someone who could embrace and understand her friends' emotions, too. I felt that night, as darkness settled gently over our neighborhood, that my heart grew alongside the girls' beautiful friendship. I reflected on the valuable lesson Leah had unknowingly imparted, about how even in our uncertainties, our willingness to listen and create connections formed an unbreakable bond that made us all just a little less alone in this vast world. Resting my head on the pillow, I closed my eyes and anticipated tomorrow's adventures, each day a new page in our story, a story I had the privilege, chaos included, to help shape alongside my daughter and her friends. As sleep enveloped me once more, I found peace knowing we were all just navigating this world together, a circle of support hand in hand as we explored the worth of every little moment, including those imperfect ones where our hearts expanded just a bit more. It was a quiet evening when I sat down at my kitchen table, the faint smell of roasted vegetables still clinging to the air, a comforting reminder of the dinner I had enjoyed alone after a long day. I was scrolling through my phone when a message from an acquaintance, Anna, popped up, asking if she could come over for a casual get-together. My fingers hesitated over the screen, thoughts racing back to a party last month where Anna, with her bright smile and bubbly personality, made a bombastic introduction that was quickly overshadowed by her confession. She referred to herself as a total klepto. At the time, I had chuckled along with the other guests, brushing it off as a quirky exaggeration, but her subsequent actions raised hair on my neck. I watched, uneasy, as she slipped a bottle of wine into her bag and, just before leaving, rifled through my collection of vintage postcards while distracted by conversation. I knew I should have said something then, it would have been a golden opportunity for a teachable moment, but the laughter of friends masked my instincts as I let it slide. Now, as I read her message, I felt the familiar knot tighten in my stomach. I typed a hesitant response, explaining that I had plans for the weekend and wouldn't be able to host her. Each word felt like a half-truth, a feeble wall I was trying to erect against an uninvited chaos. After sending it, I sank into an uneasy silence, replaying the moment she had look of glee when she thought no one was watching, a sort of childlike delight in taking things that weren't hers. The truth was, I didn't want that kind of energy in my home, a space I had worked hard to make a sanctuary. I loved the little treasures I had collected over the years, the mismatched teacups, the faded photographs, and the mere idea of them being subject to her klepto nature made me shudder. Days passed after my refusal, but the unease lingered like an unwelcoming guest. Our mutual friends began to ask about my decision. They wanted to know why I hadn't invited Anna, often couching their questions in a concern that felt almost mocking, as if I were the unreasonable one who had denied a friend's simple hospitality. "It's just a joke," you know? One of them remarked, laughter dancing at the edges of his voice as we stood by a fruity punch bowl. You can't take it seriously. But I couldn't shake off the feeling. I started to wonder if I was being a bit too harsh, a bit too closed off, yet I felt the sting of their laughter in a way that didn't match my situation. Then came a text I hadn't anticipated. Anna reached out to me again, this time apologizing for her past behavior and inviting me to discuss it over coffee. A part of me wanted to engage, to hear her thoughts and perhaps offer her the understanding I had assumed she lacked. Yet another part remained on guard, caution spilling into the forefront of my mind, warning me of potential manipulation. I chose ambiguity, suggesting that we meet in a public space, something casual, allowing me to maintain the physical distance my heart craved. When the day came, we met in a quaint little cafe, the air thick with the smell of freshly baked pastries. Anna walked in, her demeanor had shifted, the confidence seemed tempered by uncertainty, her usual flamboyance stripped down to a fragile humility. She ordered a latte, and as our small talk veered into deeper waters, I found myself listening intently, her eyes pleading for comprehension, her remorse tinged with vulnerability. She spoke of her addiction, her battles with impulse control, her admission that the label klepto was more of a coping mechanism than a joke. I felt my own walls begin to crack, an understanding blossoming within the fissures of my guarded heart. It became evident that her light-hearted banter often masked a turbulent history, a story that I hadn't anticipated digging beneath the surface. I left that meeting not with a resolution but with a renewed sense of compassion toward someone I had judged too quickly. Maybe I wasn't the asshole after all, but perhaps I was merely wrapped in the confines of my own fears. Eventually, as I navigated my way through my own thoughts, I decided to reach out again. I recorded a message for Anna, saying I'd like to try again, inviting her for a small gathering with a few close friends. It felt right, a balance of caution and empathy, a tentative step toward bridging the space I had drawn between us. Several weeks later, I would look back at that moment of choosing to create a connection rather than a rift. I realized something profound about people: we are all carrying unseeable burdens, and sometimes, understanding is the most potent remedy we can offer. Update: a few months have passed since our reconnection, and Anna has slowly proven herself to be a dear friend, one who respects my space and has taken steps toward managing her impulses. She even surprised me at my birthday party with a thoughtful, hand-picked gift from my favorite bookstore, something I never would have thought possible when the conversation first unfolded in that cafe. As it turns out, both our experiences shaped a new port of calm in the stormy seas of uncertainty. It had reminded me that sometimes the most unsettling moments can lead to the strongest of bonds. As I reflect on the months that have passed since that pivotal decision, I can't help but marvel at how far Anna and I have come. There was a time when the thought of letting her into my life again felt risky, as if I were teetering on the edge of a cliff. It was easy to envision scenarios where her past tendencies would rear their heads, leading to a cascade of mistrust and awkward moments. However, I've come to understand that letting her in required a vulnerability I hadn't expected to offer, not just to her, but to myself. With each casual meeting, be it over coffee at our favorite little cafe or an impromptu movie night at my place, I noticed the subtle shifts. In our conversations, the laughter now echoed with a reserved familiarity rather than tension and caution. Anna sincerely worked on herself, eagerly sharing her progress and the strategies she was implementing to curb her impulses. Each time she showed up with a new accomplishment or insight, my heart melted just a bit more, swelling with awe for her courage and determination to change. One evening, as we curled up on my couch with blankets piled high and an array of snacks scattered around like a makeshift feast, our laughter filled the room, mingling seamlessly with the soft glow of the lamp casting golden shadows on the walls. It felt like home in a way I had nearly forgotten, a sanctuary where two people could be honest about their flaws without fear of judgment. I remember teasing her about her initial tendency to swipe something, a fine-looking postcard or a quirky pen, when she got overly excited. She playfully rolled her eyes, recounting a story about a time she had unintentionally taken an unusual clay figurine from a friend's house, only to return it a few days later, embarrassed and ashamed. We both laughed, and it struck me how that shared moment of vulnerability forged an even stronger connection. Her self-awareness illuminated a warmth in my heart. It was during one of those cozy evenings that I proposed we visit her old neighborhood, the neighborhood she had grown up in, just to see how things had changed. To my surprise, she agreed. As we strolled through the familiar streets, Anna pointed out buildings and shops, relaying stories from her childhood that were both endearing and bittersweet. There was a sense of nostalgia that enveloped us, and I could feel a deeper understanding blooming between us as we walked under the fluttering leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks. Anna spoke vividly about her dreams and aspirations, the very ones that had often been stifled by her earlier behavior, and in that moment, I glimpsed a new layer of her, the possibility of uncharted horizons, a future reshaped by newfound accountability. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Just last week, while I was out running errands, I received a frantic text from Anna, sharing how she had just been at a local busy store and felt drawn in by the rush of excitement, a familiar tension brewing within her. I could sense her panic through the screen as she admitted having slipped a decorative mug into her bag, her heart racing as she navigated the ethics of her actions in real time. My stomach twisted, I felt a flash of empathy mixed with fear. Part of me worried, was this my fault for encouraging her too much too quickly? Only moments passed before my phone buzzed again, and I read her message thanking me for being there. She confessed that when she reached her car, panic bubbled up inside her, urging her to overcome the old impulse, yet this time she chose differently. She pressed her palm against the mug, emerging as the person she aspired to be, her pulse steadying as she marched back inside to return it. I felt endless pride for her courage, and it served as a pivotal reminder of why I let her back into my life. Now, as I sit here reflecting on our journey, I realize how beautifully intertwined our lives have become. While Anna may carry the label of a total klepto in moments of levity, she is so much more than that one chapter. She is a testament to resilience, transforming an unsettling part of her identity into a space of growth and self-awareness. And who she is now, the person she has become, inspires kindness and connection in ways I genuinely didn't believe possible. Perhaps in forging a connection based on our mutual struggles, we inadvertently carved out a bond that scaffolded our souls in the chaos of living. As I look ahead, I can't help but feel curiosity for what lies down this uncharted path for us. Whatever it may be, together, we are embracing it. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting often on that crisp autumn day when Anna sat across from me in the little cafe, her admission hanging in the air like a caustic perfume. I had braced myself for the storm that conversation could have unleashed, but instead, it had gently nudged open the door to an unexpected friendship. One chilly evening, as golden leaves swirled around outside my window, Anna and I sat curled up in my living room, a stack of books scattered between us, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the cozy space. We were laughing about our most recent adventure, her brave decision to swap out her usual baked goods for fruit and nuts at a local market, a small victory in her ongoing journey of self-regulation. Each jest carried the weight of our shared laughter and love, a testament to how far she had come since our initial meeting. I watched her, marveling at the way her eyes sparkled with pride at her choices, something I often found myself nurturing in her as she shared anecdotes about her past mishaps. It was strange to think that just months prior, I had been wary of her presence, needing to protect my own space from the chaos of her admitted kleptomania. Yet here we were, two souls in tandem, navigating the bumps of our own imperfections. In the quiet moments, I could feel vulnerability wrap around us like a warm blanket, stitching together the tearing seams of our uncertainties. We talked about the moments that had defined us, her experiences reflected in mine, and it became clear that both of us had worn masks before finally discovering a safe haven in each other. There were still echoes of the past, rumblings beneath the surface that reminded us of our journeys. Sometimes, I would catch a flicker of darkness clouding her face, a shadow of temptation that whispered if only it could persuade her just once more. But instead of fear, I felt a rush of empathy swell inside me. I had seen her taking strides, how she carried around little reminders of her commitment, like a bracelet that she fidgeted with during tense moments, a grounding anchor amid her chaotic thoughts. These days, her voices of the past had transformed from torturous howls into whispered echoes of encouragement. We had both come to recognize that acceptance doesn't mean surrendering to our flaws, but rather, learning to dance with them amid the music of life, struggling less against the rhythm and finding our own beat. With every passing day, curiosity about our future mingled with uncertainty, a blend of excitement and trepidation that accompanied me whenever I thought of where this connection might lead. We began exploring new hobbies together, pottery classes that left our hands muddied yet creative, bookshop visits where conversations would tumble into the air like soft whispers. Each activity strengthened our bond, and it became increasingly hard to imagine my life without Anna's infectious laughter. One balmy winter evening, as we sat close in front of the flickering fireplace, our shared warmth seemed to wrap around us like the flames dancing in the hearth. Anna turned to me, her voice quiet but steady. "You know, I've learned so much from you, not to be afraid of the messy parts of our lives. I found that I had learned just as much from her, how authentic friendships could coax us out of our hidden corners and inspire bravery where we once only felt fear. It was then I realized what we were building together was not simply companionship, it felt like crafting a safe haven, a gathering point for two afraid hearts trying to rewrite their narratives. Still, as thoughts of what lay ahead lingered in the back of my mind, I understood that even within this sea of calm, the tides could shift with the slightest change. Our bond felt strong, almost etched in stone, yet challenges were part of life's intricate design, woven delicately into each sunset. As I nestled deeper into the warmth of our moments like these, I recognized that every twist in this journey would further color our story, each chapter rich with experience, growth, and perhaps an occasional storm. Yet through the tempest, I felt a newfound certainty that, no matter what, Anna and I were committed to weathering it together, brave enough to embrace whatever was waiting around the corner. I never imagined I would be caught in a struggle between my boyfriend and my father, but sometimes life throws you into the most unexpected conflicts. Growing up, my dad was my rock, the kind of guy who taught me how to ride a bike on a rickety old road, always standing close enough that I felt his presence but far enough that I had to find my balance. He expected nothing less than the best from me, and after my parents' divorce when I was 12, he stepped up to play both roles, becoming fiercely protective of me. I fell in love with Caleb during my sophomore year of college. He had this effortless way of making me laugh, and I felt alive in ways I couldn't explain. Our differences were palpable. While I strived for perfection, my dad's influence still loomed large. Caleb thrived in a world of creativity and spontaneity, often nudging me to break free from my carefully crafted plans. Our relationship flourished, but there was always this looming question in my mind: would my dad approve of him? Things took a sour turn when my family invited me to dinner, a rare event since our schedules rarely aligned. I was excited to introduce Caleb to my dad, hoping they'd hit it off and I'd finally have some peace of mind regarding my father's opinions on my choices. The evening started pleasantly enough, but as the conversation turned, I felt the tension in the air when the topic of Caleb's career in graphic design came up. My father, who had always prioritized traditional paths, openly criticized Caleb's work, dismissing it as a hobby rather than a viable career. I could feel my heart race as Caleb sat there, visibly uncomfortable, trying to maintain his composure while my father launched into a monologue about the virtues of financial security and a stable job. I had been quiet, biting my tongue, but suddenly, I felt this surge of protectiveness swell within me. "Dad, that's unfair," I finally said. "Caleb works hard for what he does. Being a creative doesn't mean he isn't ambitious." The moment my words left my mouth, the room went eerily silent. I held my breath, anticipating my father's reaction as the tension seemed to cling to the walls. He frowned, his disappointment palpable. "You shouldn't be defending him, Ava. You need to look out for yourself, not this boy who can't even provide stability." I felt a flash of anger stir up my insides, blurring that well-practiced boundary of respect I usually maintained. "I'm not defending him, Dad, I'm defending what I believe in. He's passionate and talented, and honestly, I think you're missing the bigger picture." Caleb shot me a grateful glance, but I could tell the weight of scrutiny had doubled. The conversation spiraled. My dad chastised me for placing my love life above my future, and I accused him of living in a box built by his own rigid beliefs. It was an unusual role reversal. My voice seemed to overpower his, yet in the pit of my stomach lingered this heavy sense of dread. Was I being unreasonable? As emotions continued to clash, I realized I felt torn. Here was my dad, who had sacrificed so much for me, and on the other hand, Caleb, who had become my world in such a short time. I saw how frustrated Caleb was becoming and how my dad's words seemed to chip away at his self-esteem, even if he tried to hide it with that charming smile. "I think I need to go," Caleb finally said, his tone strained, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I watched as he stood up, the vulnerability in his posture cutting deeper than any argument could. My chest tightened, and I fought the urge to call him back, but instead, I just stood there, caught in this awful limbo of loyalty and love. After he'd left, my father said, "See, Ava? That's exactly what I'm talking about." But his words only fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let this end here. I spent days reflecting on that dinner as I kept in touch with Caleb, our conversations growing sweet and tender through late-night texts. I realized I needed to stand up for our love, to carve my own path rather than allow my father's expectations to influence my decisions. It took a few more awkward dinners and conversations, but slowly, I began to cultivate this new understanding between us. I invited Caleb over for coffee one afternoon, brainstorming ways to maybe patch things up. Eventually, I found the courage to invite my dad to meet with us again, and I explained how important Caleb was to me. I wanted my father to see beyond the surface, to understand the depth of Caleb's character, the kindness, the creativity, the way he believed in me just as fiercely as my dad did. When the day came for us to sit down together, my hands were clammy with nerves. I was shocked to see Caleb and my dad shake hands, both visibly tense. But this time, my voice held steadiness as I guided the conversation, sharing stories about Caleb's projects and aspirations. There were moments of quiet where skepticism hung in the air, but slowly, I watched as my dad's expression shifted, curiosity taking the place of disdain. They even exchanged a few laughs, and by the end of the afternoon, my dad begrudgingly admitted that he underestimated the depth of Caleb's passion. I could feel a weight lift off my shoulders, a tentative bridge being built between the two most important men in my life. Looking back now, I can't help but reflect on those swirling emotions and the daunting task of reconciling family expectations with love. My father's approval is still something I hold dear, and while Caleb and I still face challenges regarding our paths, we've grown stronger for it. I can wholeheartedly say that standing up for what I believe in was the right choice. Sometimes, love needs defense, especially when it's challenged by those who care about us most. Update: after that dinner, things have genuinely improved. My dad even asked to see some of Caleb's artwork, and I caught him smiling at a few pieces. It's still a work in progress, but I feel like we're finally striking a balance. Caleb has a small exhibition coming up, and my dad is planning to attend. Who knows, maybe they'll bond over creativity after all. I'm ready for whatever comes next, holding love and family close. It's been a few weeks since that dinner where tensions ran high but ultimately led to some breakthroughs. I've been thinking a lot about how love isn't just a feeling but a series of choices we make, sometimes in the face of opposition. My relationship with Caleb feels more solid than ever now. Each evening, after long days spent at work, we'd return to my cozy little apartment filled with the scent of his latest cooking experiments, usually something vibrant and aromatic. I would sit at the kitchen island, watching him chop vegetables with deft hands while sharing stories about our day, the comfort of his presence melting away the stresses of the outside world. He often joked about his own art, claiming that cooking was just another form of creativity, albeit with delicious results. The laughter that bounced off the walls during these moments felt like little victories, reminders of the bond we were nurturing together. However, the shadow of that family dinner lingered in my mind, especially as I grew excited about the upcoming exhibition. Caleb had poured his heart, his very essence, into his art, and I was both proud and anxious. Would my dad truly come? The thought of my two worlds colliding was both thrilling and nerve-wracking. One afternoon, I was organizing the invites for the exhibition in our shared workspace. I came across a beautiful canvas that Caleb had kept under wraps. It was his latest piece, a vibrant abstract bursting with swirls of color, emotion radiating from every brushstroke. I asked him about it, and he reluctantly revealed that it was inspired by his struggles, his feelings of insecurity, of being a misfit in a world that seemed to favor conventional status quos. As he described his process, I could see the passion in his eyes. A thought crossed my mind: if my dad could see beyond the surface, maybe he could understand Caleb's journey, the vulnerability he infused into every work of art. The day of the exhibition arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. The gallery echoed with the anticipatory energy of art lovers and critics mingling in hushed tones, their gazes swept across the canvas walls. When I finally spotted my dad entering, his expression was inscrutable. Caleb gave him a genuine smile from across the room, his enthusiasm palpable, and I squeezed my hands together, silently urging my dad to let his guard down. As the evening progressed, I caught snippets of conversation. My dad scrutinized the artwork, sharing anecdotes with fellow attendees, and to my relief, I noticed his expression soften when he commented on one of Caleb's pieces. They eventually gravitated toward each other, and before I knew it, Caleb was showcasing his work, sharing not only the artistic techniques but the stories woven into each piece. The highlight of the night was when Caleb revealed that the colorful abstract I had seen earlier represented the complexity of human emotion, the very thing that often isolates us. My heart swelled with pride, and I watched my dad through the crowd as confusion gave way to understanding. He listened intently, a flicker of something like admiration flickering in his eyes. I breathed a sigh of relief, allowing myself to hope that this exhibition wasn't merely a stepping stone for Caleb, it also served as a bridge between my father's skepticism and Caleb's dreams. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but notice the moments of laughter shared between them, two souls who had once clashed but were now stepping cautiously into the light of each other's worlds. After the exhibition, I found the two of them standing slightly apart, discussing art. I felt a surge of warmth. They were laughing, the walls that had divided them starting to crumble. My dad even complimented Caleb, saying he admired his unique approach. Those words settled like a sweet balm over my heart, soothing the worries that had kept me awake at night. As I moved closer, catching snippets of conversation, I realized that my hope wasn't misplaced. They were talking openly, sharing their perspectives, and I felt as if I were witnessing a new chapter unfold before my eyes. Later that night, when Caleb and I lay side by side on our couch, the glow of the city lights filtering through the window, I couldn't contain my excitement. "I think they really connected tonight," I whispered, my voice barely breaking the comfortable silence. He nodded slowly, tracing patterns on my arm as a smile spread across his face. "Your dad has a lot of wisdom. I just hope he sees that my work comes from a place of honesty," I reassured him, my heart racing. "He does, he really does. I felt it, Caleb. Whatever it is, we're making progress." He wrapped me close, and I realized, in that moment, that love isn't just about finding the right person, it's about creating a little sanctuary amidst the chaos of conflicting lives. When we support one another, we create spaces for understanding, transformation, and healing. As I drifted to sleep that night, visions of the exhibition danced in my mind, vignettes of laughter, creativity, and warmth. Perhaps the road ahead still held challenges, but we were ready for them, carrying love and family close to our hearts, ever hopeful for what lay ahead. The day of Caleb's exhibition arrived, and I stood before the mirror, adjusting my hair and replaying the countless scenarios in my mind. Each thought seemed to intertwine like threads in a tapestry, weaving together excitement and apprehension. What if my dad was still skeptical? What if Caleb felt uncomfortable in the spotlight? But as I stepped into the living room, I found myself inexplicably buoyed by the bright morning light streaming through the window, illuminating the tight-knit atmosphere of anticipation that surrounded us. Caleb paced nervously, tiny flecks of paint smudged on his hands, remnants of late-night creativity. He caught my eye and smiled, a mix of vulnerability and pride gracing his features, and I knew this moment mattered more than the fear swirling in my mind. We arrived at the gallery, an eclectic space bursting with vibrant colors and the chatter of other artists and patrons. My heart raced as we walked through the entrance, the walls adorned with Caleb's pieces, each stroke, each color, an echo of his soul. Glancing towards my dad's reserved expression, I noticed a flicker of curiosity beneath his stoic demeanor. It was as if he stepped into an entirely new world where the art spoke louder than words, unearthing emotions that had long often been buried. As the evening unfolded, friends gathered, laughter floated through the air, and more than a handful of warm exchanges transpired, my connection with Caleb growing deeper amidst the shared joy around us. My dad, quietly attentive, lingered near one of Caleb's larger pieces, a brilliant depiction of a stormy ocean met by a delicate sunrise. I could see his brow furrowed slightly, and in that moment, I felt this strange mix of hope and dread. What was he thinking? Caleb approached, his own uncertainty evident, but to my astonishment, my dad struck up a conversation, sparking a dialogue about the inspiration behind the painting. As I hovered nearby, pretending to examine other works while holding my breath, I listened to them exchange thoughts on creation and passion, their faces lighting up with every shared enthusiasm. There was something extraordinary about that moment, watching my worlds collide, like the sun breaking through clouds. I found myself reflecting on how art can bridge gaps, creating shared experiences that foster understanding. It wasn't just the bonds we cherished with those we love, it was also about allowing them to redefine assumptions, about who we are and what we're capable of. Hours slipped by in a slow, colorful dance of connection, and as the gallery began to wind down, Caleb offered my dad a framed piece that he hadn't intended to display. It was a small canvas of a sunset casting hues of orange and lavender over a silhouetted shoreline, the waves gently lapping at one another, capturing the serenity of nature, themes of hope and possibility layered within the brushstrokes. "I thought you might appreciate this," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the tension that still lingered in the air. Dad's expression softened as he accepted the gift, his fingers tracing over the edges of the frame, seeming to absorb its significance. It was as if all the barriers that once existed were systematically crumbling right before my eyes. Dad glanced up at Caleb, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of recognition, a sense of understanding that transcended boundaries. "I'd like to learn more about your work, Caleb," he said, and the words hung in the air like music, sweet and unhurried. After the exhibition, I found myself drawing a breath of relief, my body instinctively relaxing. We drove home in a comfortable silence, Caleb's hand clasped tightly in mine. The possibilities of a reconciled relationship between my dad and the love of my life felt tangible, like the name of a spell whispered in the dark. As days turned into weeks, my dad consistently asked about Caleb's latest projects, engaged in conversations with full-blown enthusiasm, and I witnessed the transformation of two previously disconnected worlds. Our family dinners transitioned from awkward silences to lively discussions, laughter spilling around the table as stories unfolded like delicate origami. Reflecting on the journey, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me. It was undeniably hard navigating love between family and partners, and yet it seemed we were learning to make room for all that life threw at us. Even simple moments, sharing our thoughts over dinner, visiting the gallery again, or watching the sunset together, redefined our connections in a fresh light. After a month, Caleb humorously dubbed my dad his new art critic. I could only laugh, grateful for the emergence of something so beautiful from what had once felt so threatening. The path ahead remained full of surprises, but we'd walk it hand in hand, a little more resilient with every stride. And every night, as I tucked myself into bed, my heart overflowed, cocooned within the safety of love and the newfound bond of family. This interconnectedness, was more than I had ever hoped for. Each day was a testament to what could be achieved when love was held fiercely amidst life's unexpected challenges, slowly morphing into something rare and profound. The horizons before us now stretched far and wide, yet still, under the painted stars, I felt a sense of peace knowing we were ready to embrace all that lay ahead.